Thank you for having me. Appreciate that being asked. What I think of postal history is a number of things. I think it includes all aspects of social, communication, economical, political, bureaucratic, statistical, development, technology, expanding civilization. And what I've learned is doing research, because I also did one on Isqueezin postal history, which is out Georgetown, Alton Hills way, is that the post office wasn't done in a vacuum. They were constructing a network and progressed as needed. As the settlement started to move away from the major centers like Halifax, Montreal, Kingston, Toronto, and Niagara, which were the big ones way back in the 1800s. I also think of postal history in terms of the canceled stamps, business logos, postcard images, and even what's on the back, even the brief little message that is there. I'm not sure if everybody's aware where Caledon is. If you're from Toronto, you probably do. Caledon's up in this corner, so above Brampton, and this is up here. So where Brampton stops, Caledon starts. The upper part of Peel, above, say, Dundas area, was opened up in 1818. That's when they signed a treaty with the Mississaugas of the Credit. And in 1819, they started to settle on the land. In 1816, there was only 9 post offices in all of Upper Canada. And in 1920, there was only 50 post offices within British North America. That including the Maritimes, PEI, Quebec, which was Lower Canada, and Upper Canada. And most of those were along the St. Lawrence River and along the edge of the Lake Erie and Lake Ontario, within 20 miles of the coast. Prior to 1832, which is the first post office that was established in Caledon, and I'll have to preface that with Caledon was made up of 3 townships. Back in 1974, Caledon was formed from half of the township of Chinguacousy, full township of Caledon, and the full township of Albion. So the first actual post office was established in Bolton in 1832. But prior to this, if they wanted to get any post mail, they would have to travel down to Toronto or have it sent to a post office, say like Aurora, north of Toronto, which some of them did. Those on the west side of Caledon would be getting it out of what was then Toronto Township and the Toronto Post Office, when Toronto was still called York. Even as early as 1831, William Lyon Mackenzie, who was the MPP for the region, was complaining about the lack of schools, the lack of post office. And it was the next year that they instrumented a number of post offices into the home district at the time. Bolton being 1832, Stanley Mills, which is now on just north of the airport and Airport Road. These are some of the other ones that were established in what is now Caledon. Sand Hill, this one here, is the village that I live close by, was established in 1841. So in 1830s, you only have 3 post offices within Caledon. The village of Bolton was called Albion, and that was common back then. And I found it in a number of places that one is that they couldn't call it Bolton because there was already a Bolton in Quebec, but there was also that they seemed to name the first post office as what the township was. So the first The first one in Albion was called Albion. The first post office in the township of Etobicoke was called Etobicoke. Squeezin and Toronto and even Chinguacousy, which is was basically Brampton, the city of Brampton. So when a post office was established, they announced it. They sent out notices. They put things into the mail, into circulars, and they put it into newspapers. And this is one I found quite by happenstance when I was doing some other research. This is the newspaper called The Liberal from St. Thomas, south of London, and 1832. As you can see along here, Albion, 11 miles from Stanley Mills, and it should have been Bolton, but they said Bolton. And this is Chinguacousy and Squeezing. Stanley Mills is kind of an oddball one there because it was in Chinguacousy, but there was already one there. The 11 miles from Stanley Mills is that networking that I'm telling you about, that the post office would go from A to B to C. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. So in the 1840s, there was a couple more, like I said, Sand Hill, and then one here. So in the 1840s, there's still only 5 post offices within Caledon. This is a little circular that from 41 shows you Sand Hill on the bottom and a few other ones. And there's that route again. It's saying that it's 10 miles south of Mona Mills, which is up at Airport Road and Highway 9 now. Stanley Mills is down in Brampton. And Sand Hill, when it was established, it was a nothing. It had hardly any people in it, but it was on the direct route from Bolton, the Albion post office, up to Mona Mills. This is a map that came out of the University of Toronto, and it says that it was done in 1859, but I want to show you up in here. This is saying Chinguacousy, and there's Bolton, and up in here you can hardly see it. It says Sand Hill and Norville and that. And I believe this map was started in about 1832, and then they just added on to it because there's different colors and different fonts. There's Albion there. Sorry. Here's an early Sand Hill stampless. Campbell's Cross, which is another one that just was developed in 1840s. In the 1850s, it really grew. Prior to the 1850s, even to get a small little village to have establish a post office had to go through London. It had to go back to Britain, and the Postmaster General would approve it. The deputy postmaster was in Montreal. In the 1850s, they opened it up so that it was done more within Canada. They still had to meet some criteria. It was a challenging process because it took years and years sometimes for a place to get a post office. The population would have to petition. They would have to have a certain amount of people on a petition. They would have to provide reasons why they thought they deserved one. They had to suggest a name, a postmaster. They had to have guarantors with a bond, not just for the postmaster, but also for the people that delivered the post. If it was found favorable, they would then the next part of the process, they would send a surveyor out, and they would they would map out the route and say tell them how long it would they were how many days a week they would deliver, the route they were going to take, the time limit they were going to do. So you see there's more, a lot more red dots starting to, establishing the post offices. This is one of the I found in the archives was from 1850. So you've got Toronto, the mail coming from Toronto, going to Weston, splitting there, going to Vaughan, King, and Lloydtown. So 6 times a week to here, and then 3 times a week up this way. Toronto to Weston, then Weston to Humber, which was around Clairville, up to Albion, which is Bolton, and then to Sandhill. And this was 3 times a week back in 1850. So that's very early on. They would start off because the roads were awful, barely roads, more trails and tracks, and it would be first on horseback with saddlebags, and then as the roads got better, they would be going on horse and buggy, and then in the wintertime sleighs. This is from Alton, Ontario. When I developed the presentation, I developed it with a Caledon kind of viewer in mind. So what I did is I've included as many of the post offices that are in the area. So this is 1898. Tullamore, this is 1903. In the 1860s, more were added, more post offices, and some of that is because of population coming in. Some of it is because of businesses being developed, especially stonework and limestone. You can see the map, more rings, more development. The cataract, if anybody's been up to the Forks of the Credit, cataract is an 1875 stampless. And then a Bolton business card from 1885. Palgrave Hotel. You can see the Queen Victoria 3-cent stamp there. 1870s proved to be quite a time period for the area because the first railway went through, which changed the networking altogether. The mail delivery now started to use some of trains to drop off at certain points, and then develop a little bit further on, going into the areas that didn't have the train. Again, the map, you're seeing more and more rings. This is another hand-drawn map of where the train the Toronto Grey Bruce line went in here and would drop mail off at Albion, and then the mail would be taken by horse and buggy. You can see some of this between, they've got mileage here in between it. So they're actually going up from Albion into Agila to Tottenham and Beaton and Loretto. So that's the railways coming in. So in the 1880s, you had the Toronto Grey Bruce going up this way to Orangeville. You had the Hamilton and Western going from Hamilton up to Barrie, or actually Allendale. And then you had coming from the south, from Toronto up through Brampton, is the Credit Valley line going up. And you can see the dots, a lot of them are kind of lining up with that route. Now, some of it was to have the trains going through the more built-up area, the bigger villages, and then some of them were attached onto the side as they developed. Up in this area, I was quite surprised at the amount of post offices over on this side of on the west side of Highway 10, but in along here is the Niagara Escarpment. Forks of the Credit, Brimstone had quarries. They were quarrying stones for Toronto City Hall, the Parliament buildings, and then loading them on to the rail cars and being shipped down to Toronto. They were also quarrying limestone and putting them through the lime kilns and then sending the lime down for the mortar. This is another hand-drawn map of the Credit Valley coming in from the south to Streetsville and then up through Brampton and then up all the way up to Orangeville. I don't know if anybody had the opportunity. I didn't in the 1970s. They used to do on the Credit Valley Railway line is excursions. That 136 was in for a while in a shed just west of Bolton. It finally came out, and it was up in the Simcoe County Railway. Last I heard, it was undergoing some repairs. I don't know if that's finished now, but this is a big postcard, unsent. The 1900s, again, a few more post offices were established. In that time period, postcards started to become very popular. So you're seeing this one as that one was from Alton. And before they developed some criteria for post offices, you could only have an address on the back. So that's why they were writing on the front. Later on, they would put down the middle a divider line. You could have your address on this side and on that side. If there was any writing on this side, they weren't allowed to send it. If they did send it, they would be criticized. There was a lot of bureaucracies. They had to do things a certain way. They had to account for things on a monthly basis. This is a postcard from Bolton, early 1900s. And I'm not sure what language this is. Another one from Bolton. This is in 1907.
I think the language, the previous one was secretarial shorthand.
Yes, that's it's interesting. This is from 1907. This is a schoolhouse in Caledon Village. They just call it Caledon, but there's so many Caledons up here, so that's how we distinguish it. And that's 1909. So we're still looking at Edward the Seventh was monarch at the time. Here's one of Caledon East. So what's interesting is those. So the railway went through here. Some of the mail that was delivered via the railway could be sent in the morning and get to the receiver in the evening. And in some cases, you could actually send one. They would send it back a reply. The rail line went along here. This was the Hamilton and North or Western, and you can just see a puff of smoke there of the locomotive. Another scene of Caledon East, postcard that I'm not very, I don't like it very much. They've got that kind of awful frame around it, which is not very appealing and takes away from the scene. That was 1907. And you get a little bit of insight of what's happening. So they're talking about the Brampton Fair and, you know, that is going to be coming up shortly and looking forward to seeing that and meeting with family. Another Main Street, Caledon East. It's 1908. And then a winter one. That's looking south. Close to Orangeville, there's a lake, Caledon Lake, which is now exclusive gated community. Never been in it, so I've looked at it from the north, but not where the gated community is. And Cheltenham, if anybody's been up to the Badlands, this is the mill pond here, and in this building here is the mill, and back over here, you can't quite make it out. There's the old brickyards up there. That's at Mississauga, just north of King. This is one from Claude. Why they ever got a post office, I'll never know, because it probably had 3 or 4 homes, a blacksmith, and a church, and a general store. That would have been about it. Patriotic from Macville. Again, this is one of the ones that they had to write on the front because it wasn't divided. Mona Road. It's a little blinking you through it right now, village. You can just see the railway crossing there. This is Airport Road. Going up, if you're going up this way, you get to Wasaga. And the village wasn't even there until the 1870s when the Toronto Grey Bruce went through. So a lot of the stuff on the back is just really basic, almost like a tweet, very short. Little messages, like a tweet or email. Each of the communities in Ontario had their own militia, and these are cards that would be sent back when the militia were on a camp in the Niagara area. And a postcard of Palgrave. Not a very good one, very pixelated. So in the 1910s, so we're talking 1913, 1916, rural mail delivery was introduced. And you can see a lot of the small post offices went. Our post office in my village was stopped operating at that time. Mail came from Mona Road because that's where the railway was, and that lasted another almost 60 years before that was decommissioned. So the postcards in this time period, there was novelty postcards with satire and jokes and so forth. This was sent as Caledon East from Toronto. And what's interesting, this is sent in 1909, and that's that's just in the very start of when automobiles were being produced. It's an embossed one, as you can see here. There's the wheel. Quite attractive little postcard. For the fishermen, this was sent out of Forks of the Credit, where there is the 2 credits meet, and there was good trout fishing there. There's some political satire, an attempt at some humor. That's out of Mayfield. This one's a little amusing. A little too much at his meeting. How strange that whenever George comes home from the lodge, he comes to bed with his hat on. I suppose it's another one of those Masonic rules. And then this one here was sent to Sandhill Post Office, printed on leather. Interesting thing, I was able to pick up two postcard albums of this that was put together by Miss Violet Lougheed, Sandhill, Ontario. She was, at that time, a lot of the young women, it was a hobby to collect postcards, and they would have people from all over send them postcards, and then they would say, well, if you send one to me, send one to my friend. And there's probably over 100 postcards that this young lady collected between 1905 and around 1916. And then I think she got married, and that's kind of when it stopped. Here's another local one, which if you take a look on the front, when you get a good thing, hold tight, but it's not signed. So sometimes they'd send things through the mail because they knew someone was going to find out about it, and it would go around the community. So who was this and what's going on? Another patriotic stamp. This one I quite like, and this was sent to this Violet Lougheed, is when the American Falls went dry in 1909. This one was sent in 1912, and that's on the American side by Goat Island. Interesting on here is the exhibition stamp that's on there for the 1912. A little bit of humor there. This is one that was sent to another Sandhill girl. I didn't know it at the time, but she was the mother of a neighbor of mine. So I did give them the card once I found that out. And you can see here it's saying that Donnie wanted me to send you some postcards. He said that you would like some of the kind I was sending him, and I shall be very pleased to send you some. But he couldn't quite send what they were asking. So this is in 1906. You've probably seen a few of these. These are postcards that came out of France during World War I. The soldier would send them back home. Interesting, when I looked at some of the postal records, is the amount of post and mail that was at this time period increased immensely, because there were, the loved ones were overseas, the soldiers were overseas, they were sending stuff back, they were getting letters back. Between a husband and a wife, they wouldn't be writing letters to each other, but when they were over there, so it was, they had to increase. Also around, just before this, another thing that increased post office was Eaton's catalogs were sent out by the mail. And so you think of all of the commerce that's going on, and why, they had to accommodate this, so increased mail, went from once a week to 3 times a week to 6 times a week. and sometimes not in the smaller communities, if you're in a larger community, you'd get mail delivered to you twice a day. This looks like it wasn't sent per se, but it was maybe put into an envelope. You can see there it says field PO, and it's February 27th, 1918. So what I believe this, and if you see on the back there, it was a censor, still had to stamp it. So during this time of the postcards, you'd get all kinds of New Year's and different holidays. So this is a New Year's one from Albion. Eventually, Bolton did get their own post office name in 1896, and then a few years later, another post office was given the Albion name, which is still within the Albion Township. Valentine's, and this is Palgrave Station, to Coventry, which is only a few miles apart. St. Paddy's Day, from Credit Forks to Palgrave Station. Again, you see all the embossed on there. Somebody even did little drawings around it. Birthdays. Father's Day. I'm not sure if there was a Father's Day back then, but it was to his father. This is going from Sand Hill to Campbell's Cross, which is maybe 5 kilometers away, if that. Thanksgiving, Christmas. But they also use postcards and postal in business. So this particular postcard, HMS Good Hope, was sunk in 1914 in the South Pacific, close to Chile. All hands were lost. It was a brutal battle. 2 years later, Purity Flour were having it printed on for advertising and to promote their different flours. This is out of Cataract. Went to Cataract to the general store there. So they were, they would use what they had. You got your postal business imprinted envelopes. This one I quite like. Again, you see 1926, so it's commemorating 60 years of Canada's founding. Would have been quite an expense for all these envelopes. That was printed on both sides, kind of like it on the bottom there. Sells like the Dickens to owners of chickens. Schaefer Hardware, 1935 in Bolton. The Caledon Mountain Trout Club, 1918, still in existence, still exclusive, just north of Inglewood. Another merchant, a hardware merchant in Inglewood. And they're also using postal history, postcards, and so for recreation, for promotion. If anybody's been up to Bell Fountain to Max Park, they don't call it Max Park anymore, but in the 1930s, 1940s, it was quite a spot to visit. Some would go there by train, get off at Forks of the Credit train station, and then go down to the park, and others would drive. He used this as seasoned greetings. If anybody's been along the Forks of the Credit Road, this building here is still there. Here you can see it was a gas station. A while back, they used to sell ice creams there. Ferndale Park, which is just north of Cheltenham. It was a very busy spot back in the day. Part of it's now owned by, and I'm going to say Polish, but it could be a Ukrainian or something. They have a pavilion there. And that was 1948. They also used it for advertising events, such as this dance that was going to be held in Caledon East. This is an interesting postcard for two reasons. This is 1944. So you can see, you know, the buildings that are there, the cars are interesting. But this is being sent. If anybody's ever been to Bolton Camp, either attended it, it started in 1926. Young children and mothers with young children would go there for a week or two, stay on the camp, activities, whatnot. But during World War II, they used it for a singling course. So they would string wires and gain some experience before they would be shipped overseas. This is an aerial view of the camp. Again, this is again in 1944. And this is a young guy that's he tried to spell station 3 or 4 times before he got it right. Terracotta Inn, this is from the 1970s. This Grange Castle, not so much a castle, still being lived in, but it has gone through a big renovation after a major fire, I believe in the 1970s. And then Albion Hills Conservation, when you could still swim there, you can't anymore. This is another one that's from Sand Hill. So sometimes this one here is a photograph pasted onto a postcard. And then this one here is a postcard, a photograph made into a postcard, which these people sent, maybe just gave it to somebody because it's not, I don't see it having a stamp on it. Commemorative stamps, envelopes, this one is for Queen Elizabeth II's coronation. And this one here is my aunt, who was living in Florida at the time, had this sent to me as First Man on the Moon stamp. So 1830s, 3, 40s, couple more, 50s, you know, started to really expand. 60s really expand, 70s, 80s, the railways come in between the 70s and the 1880s, and then the 90s, 1910s. So now, including, you know, a Shoppers Drug Mart, there's 6 post offices within Caledon. So I like to name my sources. So I'm president of the Albion Bolton Historical Society. So there's a few photographs from there. I did quite a bit of work on through the Canada's Library and Archives. the British North American Philatelic, I probably pronouncing that wrong, Society. Max Rosenthal, he's written some really good articles on local postal history. Some of the gazetteers and directories, PAMA, which is the Peel Archives, and some historic maps from various sources. And then the postcards are all ones that I've collected over the years. A few have been given to me, and then some through the Toronto postcard club and eBay and so forth.